Trump tweets. The president breaks his Twitter silence after testimony by fired FBI Director James Comey. Conservatives react. Christians gathered for a conservative summit give us their take on President Trump's first 6 months in office. British elections.
What the country needs more than ever is certainty.
Changes are in the works after a big loss for the Tories. We'll break it all down from London. Feminine genius.
Nella loro dignità e nel loro ruolo.
Pope Francis tells members of a Vatican Council women play a key role in building peace. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, June 9th, 2017. Thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump strikes back. He's disputing former FBI Director James Comey's claims and denying he ever asked him for his loyalty. Before Congress, Comey accused Trump of spreading lies and suggested the president attempted to influence the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Correspondent Mark Irons has more on the president's reaction from the White House. Mark?
Wyatt, President Trump faced journalists in the Rose Garden during a joint news conference with the president of Romania. He fired back at James Comey today, saying nothing in Comey's testimony to the Senate showed collusion with Russia or obstruction of justice. The president refused to say whether his private conversations with Comey were taped, but he promised to tell us about it in a, quote, very short period of time. The president says he's happy with Comey's testimony because it showed he didn't do anything wrong. But the president says Comey did not tell the truth.
James Comey confirmed a lot of what I said, and some of the things that he said just weren't true. I hardly know the man. I'm not going to say, I want you to pledge allegiance. Who would do that? Who would ask a man to pledge allegiance under oath? I mean, think of it. I hardly know the man. It doesn't make sense. No, I didn't say that.
The existence of those White House tapes was the biggest question. The president said, quote, "You're going to be very disappointed when you hear the answer." Wyatt?
Mark, I understand that President Trump agreed to speak under oath about what he said to James Comey?
That's right, Wyatt. The president says he is 100% willing to talk with special counsel Robert Mueller under oath as part of Mueller's ongoing investigation. Trump made the remarks before leaving Washington. He will spend the weekend at his retreat in Bedminster, New Jersey. Wyatt?
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting at the White House. Thanks, Mark. President Trump pledges to improve the nation's roads, bridges, and pipelines.
For too long, America has poured trillions and trillions of dollars into rebuilding foreign countries while allowing our own country, the country that we love, and its infrastructure to fall into a state of total disrepair.
The president visited the Department of Transportation's headquarters in Washington today to tout his goal of cutting regulations during what his aides have dubbed Infrastructure Week. Presidential counselor Kellyanne Conway praises President Trump for defending life. She made the remarks at the Faith and Freedom's Road to Majority conference in Washington. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports tonight from the gathering of Christian and Catholic conservatives. Jason?
Why President Trump himself spoke here yesterday. Vice President Pence addresses the summit tomorrow. Today it was White House counselor Kellyanne Conway, a Catholic and pro-life advocate, who led the people to get up and applaud. Christian conservatives gathering in Washington cheer the president and one of his closest advisors, Kellyanne Conway.
We have not only his back, we've got your back. We're praying for you.
Conway, a cradle Catholic, says abortion is the #1 issue for her.
We had worked on pro-life messaging for years. It took Donald Trump to leverage that message and take it in a direction and to a height that was all his own. It took a Manhattan billionaire male who for most of his life was pro-choice to deliver the most impassioned defense of life I've ever heard from a presidential debate podium on October 19th in Las Vegas against Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
That's not lost on people in this crowd. Catholic pro-life advocate Larry Sirignano says if this was baseball, Trump would be batting a very exceptional 700 or 800. He says Trump is making good on pro-life promises, but Larry doesn't give the president a perfect score.
Husbands and wives disagree, certainly. So we can't agree with everything he does. I would like some difference in style, probably.
The tweets?
The tweets and the language and that we, would all cringe at. But at the same token, he probably couldn't get it done if he did fall by the rules.
One point everyone here can agree on is defunding Planned Parenthood. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell points out Congress and the White House have again given states the right to do that.
Thanks to the action that we took, states now have more freedom to fund women's health in the way that works best for their communities, not Planned Parenthood's Washington lobbyists.
The majority leader there speaking about overturning an Obama regulation that would have stopped states from keeping federal funds from Planned Parenthood. McConnell also revealed today that next week he's going to start a series of Senate floor speeches on the importance of the right to free speech. Wyatt?
Jason, McConnell promised the conservative gathering last year that Republicans would stay firm in waiting until after the election to fill Justice Scalia's seat on the Supreme Court. What did he say this year?
Leader McConnell says the president does realize that one of the longest impacting things he can do as president is through his judicial nominations. Those are lifetime appointments. And McConnell says the White House is really looking for Gorsuch-style judges to fill those lower court openings.
Correspondent Jason Calvi in Washington. Thanks, Jason. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt heads to the Vatican. In a tweet, Pruitt wrote, "Met with Archbishop Gallagher, Secretary for Relations with the States, this morning while visiting the Vatican. Such a sacred place." UK Prime Minister Theresa May says she's sad over the results of the country's election, but she's moving forward by setting up a new government.
This government will guide the country through the crucial Brexit talks that begin in just 10 days and deliver on the will of the British people by taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union.
May met with Queen Elizabeth this morning to seek permission to form a government with the support of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. The Prime Minister had called for an early election to strengthen her hand in Brexit, but instead her Conservative Party lost its majority in Parliament. Dan Ashby, UK correspondent for Feature Story News, is joining us from London to help us break down the election results. Dan, Prime Minister Theresa May isn't letting go. She's still the Prime Minister. What happens next?
Well, what we have is a sort of informal coalition, which you have to understand is a fairly extraordinary turn of events here in the UK. What we are used to is strong governments. Our parliamentary system is set up to get those strong governments. For the vast majority of UK election, one party gets more than 50% of members of Parliament in the House of Commons, and with that is allowed to govern. What we have here is no party actually doing that. The closest is the Conservatives, and what they've done is they've approached the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland and asked them to support them, which they've agreed to do, hoping that will help them pass legislation and rule.
Well, this election comes right after a series of terrorist attacks in the UK. What was the biggest issue on voters' mind?
Up until about halfway through this campaign, it was all about the European Union, of course, Britain exiting the European Union in 2 years' time, the economy, public services, a wide-ranging debate about whether the NHS is good enough, whether schools are good enough. But then, of course, we had that devastating news halfway through the campaign that 22 people had been killed by a nail bomb in Manchester, followed by a terror attack in London at the weekend, and that completely transformed the campaign. In the last few days, everybody was talking about security, with both the opposition party and the ruling Conservative Party accusing each other of falling short.
Britain is set to exit the EU in 2019, as you mentioned. How will the results of this election impact the Brexit negotiations?
Well, the whole theory of this election was that Theresa May wanted to strengthen her hand. She had sky-high popularity when she called the election. The general assumption was that she would get a bigger majority, even a landslide. That would allow her to go to Brussels and say that she represented the will of the people and they had chosen her model of Brexit. Of course, what's actually happened is the opposite. We have a hung parliament where no party has got an overall mandate. That will make the negotiations far more difficult.
Dan, do you know or have a sense of how British Catholics voted?
Well, traditionally, studies have shown that Catholics have tended to support the Labour Party in the UK, although recently that pattern hasn't been so consistent. What we might see is a more elevated role for Northern Irish issues, religious issues and social issues in UK politics as a whole.
Dan Ashby, UK correspondent for Feature Story News. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Okay, thank you.
Crews uncover bodies and aircraft parts from the wreckage of a military plane crash in Myanmar. The plane, carrying 122 people, included 15 children, crashed Wednesday into the sea just off Myanmar. Fishermen joined Navy and Air Force personnel recovering at least 30 bodies. It was raining when the flight went down, but the cause of the accident is not known. A 17-year-old girl is dead after the church bus she was on crashed outside of Atlanta. The accident injured dozens of others. Members of the Mount Zion Baptist Church in Huntsville, Alabama, were on their way to the airport for a mission trip when it collided with another vehicle and rolled over. The church posted a plea for prayers on its Facebook page. A suicide attacker blew himself up in a market south of Baghdad, killing at least 21 people today. Another bomb exploded nearby, wounding 5 others. Explosions around Iraq have killed hundreds of people this year alone. Human rights organizations are warning large numbers of civilians are also being killed or hurt as Iraqi forces fight ISIS near Mosul. They say unguided weapons injure many others besides militants.
The assumption should be that anywhere munition is being dropped, civilians will be there. And when you're using these really powerful bombs, the likelihood of civilian death, injury, and infrastructure is there.
The Iraqi coalition estimates that the airstrikes unintentionally kill nearly 500 civilians since the start of the Mosul campaign. Pope Francis condemns the terrorist attacks in Iran that killed at least 17 people earlier this week. In a letter written by the Vatican Secretary of State, he says in part, His Holiness commends the souls of the deceased to the mercy of the Almighty, and he assures the people of Iran of his prayers for peace. The Holy Father says there needs to be greater recognition of the role of women play in building peace.
Le donne e perfino I bambini sono infatti tra le vittime più frequenti di una cieca violenza.
Francis says when women have the opportunity to share their gifts with the community, society is transformed. The Holy Father made the comment to members of the Vatican's Office for Interreligious Dialogue at the end of their annual meeting. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us now from Rome. Mary, what points did the Holy Father make about the role of women in dialogue?
Wyatt, he said many women are well prepared to participate in religious dialogue at the highest levels, and not just from the Catholic perspective and all religions. And he said that that means the contribution of women shouldn't be limited to only, let's say, feminine or women-only subjects. Women are prepared to talk about a myriad of things. And he said for dialogue to work, men and women have to walk together. And he said today more than ever, we need women to be present.
He highlighted some of the challenges that prevent women from being educators and creating a more fraternal society. What are some of those big challenges?
Wyatt, as we know, today women and even children are among the frequent victims of what the Pope called blind violence that's going on around the world today, where hatred and violence are taking over, families are being torn apart. And this prevents the woman in society from being that force for good, for bringing her insight and her wisdom, and be an educator, as the Pope so aptly pointed out, her role in educating society within the family and beyond to make a more serene and effective society for today.
So then how did the Vatican's Office for Interreligious Dialogue address this issue?
It seemed like an unlikely place for the subject of women to come up, the role of women in the church, interreligious dialogue. But the meeting asked a lot of interesting questions. What is the role of women in interreligious dialogue? How can they contribute to this interfaith harmony? How can the church benefit from their specific gifts? So the cardinal who heads that office, Cardinal Tauron, wanted to stretch the church's stress that the church's vision is one of equality. Men and women doing this together, and if they do that, will promote, he said, better interfaith education.
I know a lot of people appreciate the fact that you word the word gift, Mary, the fact that the role of women provides a gift to the church. Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much for talking with us, Mary.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Coming up, more fallout after James Comey's testimony on Capitol Hill, how the fired FBI director's comments could affect President Trump, and Pope Francis offers advice for those moments when your heart hurts.
Che ci salva nei momenti brutti, la preghiera.
Pope Francis urges Christians to pray and have hope in God in moments of pain and sorrow. During his morning homily, the Holy Father reminded us the Lord is always there and added we need to thank God for the joy he has given us. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump is taking heat from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. They're responding to yesterday's testimony from James Comey, the FBI director that Trump fired.
It is wrong for the President of the United States to tell or imply to an FBI director that an investigation should not go forward.
The president's fitness for office is something that is being called into question, and he is undermining the system of checks and balances, of separation of power.
President Trump defends himself, saying in a tweet, despite so many false statements and lies, total and complete vindication. And wow, Comey is a leaker. That following Comey's admitting he gave his notes about Trump to a friend to give to the media. Join us now is Jim Antle, the politics editor at the Washington Examiner. So Jim, reflecting on all of this now, we've heard from the president, we've heard from lawmakers on this situation. How do you think just the general public is reacting to all of this?
I think with a lot of confusion, because when you look at the reactions that you got from yesterday's testimony, most people seem to be very dug in to the positions that they already held. Republicans are claiming that the president was vindicated by Comey's testimony, pointing to things that he said that were consistent with what the president has said publicly. Democrats are continuing to raise a lot of concerns, and the fact is that Comey multiple times publicly called the president a liar, gave examples of why he believed him to be a liar, and did so under oath, which is always sort of politically problematic. So I think the public is probably still confused about what really is going on here.
Justifiably so, with all those different mixed messages. When you think about it, what Comey shared with the Senate Intelligence Committee, is there any evidence that shows that the president obstructed justice regarding any of the testimony or the way that he handled Michael Flynn?
There are going to be differences of legal opinion on that. A lot of it does come down to intent, and the president has even denied saying some of the things that Comey said that he told the FBI director at the time. But even assuming that Comey's testimony is factually accurate, it does then come down to a question of intent. So the people will point to the fact that the president didn't do anything subsequently, simply expressed a hope, maybe thought he was giving some kind of a character witness to an official he had just fired. But obviously, a lot of people are going to say that it was inappropriate, and then legal questions will remain, and political questions, questions of political judgment, if it's actually Congress making the decision as to whether they want to take some action based on whether they think it's obstruction.
In the Rose Garden today, Trump said, I'll tell you about that maybe sometime in the very near future.
Right.
Do you think we'll ever get tapes or anything from the Trump administration?
A lot of times when the president says they're going to do something in the very near future, it tends not to happen. But it is interesting. They've never denied the existence of tapes. The president himself is the person who floated the idea of tapes. Whether he wants people just to think that there are tapes and is not eager to do anything to dispel that notion, or whether he is at some point going to produce tapes. I mean, it's interesting that Comey said he leaked the memo in response to the idea that the president might have tapes, which does raise some interesting questions.
A lot of questions for sure, and a lot that we'll continue to cover. Jim Antle, politics editor at the Washington Examiner. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, Pope Francis has a message for students from around the world and the dangers of a religious litmus test.
This is a very, very grievous abrogation of the most basic rights.
Best-selling author Eric Metaxas responds to comments made by Senator Bernie Sanders.
Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Bishops in Vietnam say they are alarmed by a new religious law in their country. They say it gives the government tight controls over church activities. The Vietnamese Bishops' Conference is asking the faithful in the country's 26 dioceses to pray for the good of the nation. According to a Vatican news agency, the bishops worry the new law on beliefs and religions interferes with the church's internal affairs. Catholic leaders say they want to work with authorities but are demanding their independence. Should presidential nominees go through a religious litmus test? In a Senate hearing this week, Senator Bernie Sanders questioned the faith of President Trump's pick for Deputy White House Budget Director. Joining us now is Eric Metaxas, a New York Times bestselling author and the host of The Eric Metaxas Show, a nationally syndicated radio program. And he just released a new book, If You Can Keep It. So tell us a little bit about how Russell Vought got caught up defending his Christian faith in a Senate nomination hearing.
Well, it's hilarious, except it's true. It's unbelievable is what it is. You have a nomination hearing for somebody who's going to be part of the budget and the budget office, basically. And so you have these senators questioning this person's fitness to be a leader in the budget office. And Senator Bernie Sanders, maybe you've heard of him, for some reason had dug up something that Mr. Vaught, Russell Vaught, had written about Christian faith. He wrote it for his alma mater, Wheaton College. They were going through some controversy. Somebody at Wheaton College had some funny views about Islam. Wheaton College is an outspokenly Christian college. There are a number of them around America. And so, of course, if you're part of a Christian college, you're expected to have certain views. Well, so Russell Vaught wrote about this and basically said that Christianity and Islam are widely divergent. He didn't say it in a nasty way. He just said it to make a point of clarification. But Senator Sanders took this as though he had said Heil Hitler or I'm with the KKK. He said, we don't want these views in America or something like that. And I thought to myself, is he kidding? Like, this is basic Christianity. There was not even a tone of animus in what Vaught wrote. He wrote it defending his alma mater, a Christian university. He was just saying the most basic thing. But Bernie Sanders, as a senator who ought to know the Constitution, he seemed to think that this was deeply, deeply troubling to the point that this person should not be voted on.
You mentioned the Constitution. Do you think Senator Sanders violated Article 6 of the Constitution, which states no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification for any office?
Well, we're at that point. I mean, it goes way beyond violating Article 6. But yeah, it does violate Article 6. In America, we've really had it so good with regard to religious liberty that most of us are very ignorant about it. I'm not at this point because I've spent the last few years writing a book about it and thinking about it. But the reality is that the government of the United States is supposed to have nothing to do with people's faith. People are free to believe crazy things, good things, Christian things, Muslim things, Jewish things. The moment the weight of the government intrudes and says, if you don't think this way, we don't like you, we're going to punish you, you're not going to get a job, you're not going to be nominated, you'll be fined. The moment the government does that, and the U.S. government has been doing that in the last 10 or 20 years, it's an astounding moment for America. We cease to be the country that we have been for over 200 years the moment leaders like U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders don't understand this. But he's not the only one. This is a very, very grievous abrogation of the most basic rights and ideas that are in the Constitution. And we need to talk about this. We need to scream about it because this was grievous. It was a stunning moment that a senator could be that ignorant and that could try to knock somebody back on his heels for simply stating his Christian faith. There are many Christians in America. The idea, this sends a chilling effect. It's precisely what the founders did not want to happen, and it's happening left and right.
Eric Metaxas, host of the Eric Metaxas Show and New York Times bestselling author. Thanks so much for talking with us about it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis hangs out with students from around the world as a new office at the Vatican opens.
Que Dios lo bendiga. Y recen por mí.
The Holy Father spoke to students from 9 countries via Google Hangout. The students are part of an international organization started by Pope Francis in 2013 to promote the culture of peace through education. The foundation has moved into offices in Rome owned by the Vatican. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you back here on Monday. Good night and God bless.